Good evening. My name is Bruce Gillette. I am the moderator of Presbyterians for Earth Care. We are very grateful to have people coming literally across the country for this webinar with the staff from the National Wildlife Federation on their program Sacred Grounds. It's an exciting thing for us to do. It's all the more exciting to hear how churches are living it out already. And we hope after this recording is available in a couple of days, you will share it with other churches, not only Presbyterians, but others, and definitely have your Presbyterian newsletter include a link. The more churches we do this, the better we all can care for God's creation and do some steps in countering climate change as well and modeling for what people can do at their homes. Let's begin with a word of prayer. Let us pray. Loving God, we do give you thanks this evening for the beauty of your creation, and we remember the places we gather to worship, to learn, to serve you. We give you thanks for our church buildings and grounds, for all who maintain them and all who have contributed to them. We pray this evening we will learn new ways of not only caring for them, for the members and people in the community, but also for God's creation, that we might do plantings and other creative ways to make these places welcoming to all of your creation. For in the end, all of it belongs to you, and you call us to care for it, not only for the people, but for the whole of your creation. We give you thanks for the staff from the National Wildlife Federation and for their important work, and ask your blessing upon them. Be with all who are gathered here and those who will watch this later. Bless us as we seek to care for your creation. We pray it all in the name of our risen Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
All right. My name is Mindy Heidenfelter. I'm the coordinator for Presbyterians for Earth Care. And it's my pleasure to introduce our presenters for tonight, both representing the National Wildlife Federation. We have Natalie Cohen, who's the manager of community conservation, and she works for National Wildlife Federation's Mid-Atlantic Regional Center, where she is the manager of community conservation. For the past 4 years, she's dedicated her career to supporting community-driven greening projects in Baltimore, Philadelphia, Wilmington, Delaware, and Lancaster, Pennsylvania. As a native plant lover and aspiring naturalist, she spends much of her free time in her backyard, as well as public green spaces throughout Baltimore City. Before beginning with National Wildlife Federation, Natalie was the environmental coordinator at Amazing Grace Lutheran Church in East Baltimore, where she led environmental programming and was board member of Charm City Land Trusts. We also have Danielle Wendt. She works with the National Wildlife Federation's Mid-Atlantic Regional Center as their Chesapeake Conservation Corps member. After graduating from McDaniel College with a double major in English and environmental studies, she considers herself to be an environmental storyteller. At National Wildlife Federation, she uses her storytelling prowess to create resources for communities and leads much of the Mid-Atlantic Regional Center's social media efforts. Danielle hopes to be able to continue building her storytelling skills and helping to increase communities' conservation capacity after her core year ends in August. And so I am now going to turn it over to Danielle and Natalie.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bruce and Mindy, for having us tonight. We're so happy to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And we have a great presentation planned for you today. And we will be sure to save time at the end for questions, of course. So again, my name is Natalie Cohen. I'm the manager of community conservation for NWF in our Mid-Atlantic region. And I have the pleasure of really leading sacred grounds throughout the Mid-Atlantic, but also working alongside communities to support their greening efforts. And tonight I'm going to be talking about our Sacred Grounds program and hopefully inspiring some Presbyterians to plant for wildlife. And if you haven't done so already, please put your name and your house of worship or your organization and where you're calling from in the chat. We'd love to see where everyone's tuning in from tonight. Here are just some really adorable pictures of me and Danielle with our doggos. I have Dipsy Doodle on the left, and this is Roscoe on the right. Danielle, would you like to chime in and say hi?
Hi, everybody.
Thank you. Wonderful. So tonight, a quick overview. We're going to be discussing NWF Sacred Grounds program. We're going to dive into the important role that native plants play in supporting wildlife. We'll share some really incredible success stories of different sacred grounds congregations throughout the country. And we'll wrap up by kind of sharing some next steps and resources that you can utilize if you're looking to take sacred grounds back to your congregation. NWF is the country's oldest and largest environmental organization. Founded in 1936, NWF began as a traditional conservation org, really set on conserving America's bountiful wildlife for sportsman reasons, for our hunters and anglers. But flash forward to today, we are an organization that's committed to centering environmental justice at the core of our mission. And in the Mid-Atlantic, we're really we spend most of our time and resources working with frontline communities and those most vulnerable to climate change and environmental injustice. As a national org, we have 7 regional centers throughout the country. Our office, the Mid-Atlantic Regional Center, is based in Annapolis, Maryland. I live in Baltimore. Danielle's in Ellicott City, if folks are familiar. And we have our headquarters in Reston, Virginia, and there's also a National Advocacy Center in DC that handles most of our policy and advocacy work. And within the Mid-Atlantic, so we're a part of the education and community conservation team. And so we really lead on the ground work in 4 key geographies at the moment, and those are Baltimore, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, and Wilmington. And we are slowly expanding into DC and the DMV area with sacred grounds as well.
So at this point, you might be wondering, what is Sacred Grounds? Nationwide, Sacred Grounds is a National Wildlife Federation program that works with faith communities to connect their faith practices into environmental stewardship. So congregations that participate in Sacred Grounds, they garden for wildlife. They install a pollinator garden on their grounds to create wildlife habitat. And that also comes with additional benefits like addressing stormwater issues and also providing access to green space for their congregants. And why churches and other faith communities? Because they have the community buy-in, the community power of already having a large group of people committed to their community. And so they can really harness that community power to engage their community in the stewardship work that we're doing. So each congregation that participates in Sacred Grounds creates a unique space for praise and celebration of nature's wonders that connects people and nature. And it's unique not only in, the specific type of plants that each congregation wants to install to support the wildlife in their own local habitat, but also to meet the needs of the congregation itself, whether they want their garden to primarily serve as like an outdoor prayer space or other potential uses for their garden. It's very much tailored towards what you and your congregation would like your garden to be. While Sacred Grounds churches can be everywhere, there are 3 specific key geographies that we have specific programmatic work in. Those are the Great Lakes area, which has a bunch of different cities that a different program lead works in. And then us in the Mid-Atlantic mainly work in Sacred Grounds in Baltimore and in Wilmington, Delaware. And then there's a little bit of overlap with our colleague Naomi, who works in the DMV area. So she works in DC, Maryland, and Virginia. And like I said, you don't have to be in any of those areas to participate in sacred grounds, but what you do need to is you need to identify as a faith community or house of worship or other spiritual organization. You need space on your grounds to actually install a garden, enough committed people in your congregation to have a green team that's going to continue to take care of the garden, and funds to install that pollinator garden and host community engagement events and activities. Although if you do count as part of one of those key geographies, you can sort of supplement that last thing of funding by applying for a mini grant if you are if you meet the requirements for that program, because each program is a little bit different on how they approach sacred grounds. So why would you want to participate in sacred grounds other than the big one of increasing wildlife habitat and supporting our local native creatures? There are also some key benefits to your congregation. You're providing opportunities for people to have access to green space and to connect to nature. You could create a space for prayer and reflection within your neighborhood and close to your own congregation's grounds. A lot of different faiths have stewardship as a part of their like ideology and faith, and so that can also be embedded into why you might want to have a sacred ground. And then also having particularly a native plant garden helps to build resilient communities, climate change resilient communities, because it can help reduce things like flooding and pollution. And so all of those things are very beneficial to you and your congregation. And then in just general, why you might want to have access to green space and why increasing access to green space is so important. There are social benefits, you know, if you host events at your garden or you just have that installation, getting to connect with people and connect with nature at the same time. There are health benefits. Research has shown that having experience in green space can help reduce stress, and there are different chemicals that are released when you touch dirt, or in the if you have trees that come off the trees that are really beneficial and help relax people. There are economic benefits in providing beauty and increasing the value of your property potentially. And then there's the big environmental benefits of supporting your native wildlife like butterflies, bees, and birds, and other wildlife by creating this habitat for them.
I'm muted. Okay. Thanks, Danielle, for that quick overview of the program. So to keep things, short and sweet tonight, this is going to be a very quick, high overview of the many benefits of native plants and really what they are and why they're so important, kind of the why you should care. And so when you garden for wildlife, you are providing habitat and nourishment to nature around you. And it's really important to keep the following elements in mind, that when you're striving to garden for wildlife, and really even when you're just choosing your plants, you want to think of providing shelter, food, places to raise young, and water. Everyone needs water. And of course, sustainable gardening practices. And luckily for us, native plants can provide 4 out of those 5 elements of a healthy habitat. And you may be asking yourself, what is a native plant? Well, that can be defined as a species that is found in a particular region, which has been present for a tremendously long period of time, definitely pre-colonial, and so long, in fact, that it has co-evolved to form specialized relationships with a number of insects. And a great example of this is the monarch butterfly. The monarch is listed as an endangered species, just happened this past year. And that's mostly due to habitat loss and fragmentation. And now the monarch relies on the milkweed family, which is a type of native plant, to complete their life cycle. So without milkweed, the monarch can't complete its life cycle and make its way down to Mexico where it overwinters. And so the butterflies lay their eggs exclusively on the underside of milkweed leaves. And then the caterpillars, when they hatch, only eat milkweed. So it's a really great example and illustration of how native plants are the base of a functioning and healthy ecosystem, especially because all the insects that are attracted and use these plants for their habitat, especially caterpillars. Let's talk about caterpillars in particular. Caterpillars are drawn to these native plants, and the animals, like the birds, love to eat them. And so Dr. Doug Tallamy, who's kind of like the native plant guru, godfather, out of the University of Delaware, he says to plant for the caterpillars. And so when you're planting for the caterpillars, you're creating stronger food chains because the birds eat and other creatures eat the insects. You're creating healthier ecosystems. And in turn, we're creating environments that are more resilient in the face of climate change. Okay, right. I moved my slides around. So just to really bring this example to light, the oak tree. So there's a number of different native species of oak, but each oak, I believe this is the white oak here, can support up to 557 different species of caterpillars. Whereas the ginkgo, which is a very common urban street tree from Asia, supports 0 caterpillars. And so when you start to really look at the bigger picture, and for birds, for instance, we have a global population decline, and we're actually kind of in a crisis, biodiversity crisis across the board, but birds are certainly feeling it pretty badly. 96% of birds rely on invertebrates to feed their young. And so during the breeding season, birds need a lot of insects. And for chickadees in particular, which is this cutie on the right, to successfully raise a clutch of hatchlings, so about 4 or 5 baby birds, they require over 5,000 insects. So it's really just kind of, and that's just one bird, that's just one nest, So when you start to think of, oh my goodness, all of this, important, incredible creatures that we've become so familiar with and love so much really rely on these insects like grasshoppers and caterpillars, and those insects rely on our native plants. And so in addition and beyond, the ecosystem services that native plants provide, they also help to reduce the impact of severe storms due to their deep root systems. They're able to infiltrate, greater amounts of runoff and stormwater. Save the bees. So growing healthy food, I'd say I think it's like 3/4 of the produce that ends up on our dinner table was pollinated by bees. So obviously we need our native plants for the pollen and the nectar. Beautifying spaces. There's nothing better than transforming your lawn into a native pollinator garden. It is so impactful. It's so beautiful. And you don't have to mow as much, which is great. And Danielle was saying, there's studies that show improved mental health and just physical wellness, being outside. And then, of course, and really in particular with sacred grounds, you're building community around native plants. You're building a community of faith-based stewards that really feel called to steward the land that we walk on, our sacred grounds. And in the long run, native plants just require less input, which is also great when you're thinking about, houses of worship notoriously have humongous lawns and humongous parking lots. And so you can at least cut back on some of the lawn. And in the long term, they require less maintenance than more traditional landscaping practices. And that's because they're adapted to our local soils. So you don't really need to fertilize or use pesticides. They're adapted to our regional precipitation wherever you may be in the country. So you don't need to water them unless they're very young and becoming established or in extreme heat waves. And they're really resilient and hardy once they're established. And I just wanted to wrap up like a perfect example of natives and non-natives and invasive plants. I'm going to start with the plant on the right. That's the butterfly bush. I bet lots of folks have seen this plant. It might be planted at your church. It might be planted in your backyard. And though it does attract a lot of butterflies, no doubt about that, it's super rich in nectar. It's invasive. It's from Asia. So it's quite aggressive and it can spread. And that food source isn't as healthy or nutritious as a native plant could be. And so invasive butterfly bush to the far right, you can actually see some rudbeckia, black-eyed Susans down here, and coneflower. Oops. So I love to see that they have other native plants. And then in the center, this is a non-native tropical milkweed. So tropical milkweed is from the tropics. It is not naturally found in North America. And it actually doesn't, because it's not native here, I'm not sure exactly what happens with the biology, but it's prone to parasites. And these parasites grow on the parasites come from the milkweed, they transfer to the monarchs, and then the monarchs spread them from plant to plant, and it kills the monarchs. And then you move to the left, and this is like our most prized milkweed on this screen. This is the native swamp milkweed, or Asclepias incarnata. That's really beautiful. Mount Cuba in Delaware has done lots of studies, and they found that this species of swamp milkweed, the incarnata, actually attract the most monarch butterflies and caterpillars, which is pretty cool. And so the definition of gardening is the act of planting with a purpose. And wildlife, they need native plants to thrive and to survive. And so we really just encourage folks to definitely not plant invasive species, but aim for 70%. That's what the new science is coming out. 70% native plants is like a good goal to hit. So you don't have to necessarily remove your butterfly bush, but you just want to be sure that you're planting, an abundance of other more beneficial plants. And we've got lots of really great links here. These are some resources to help you identify what plants would work best for you in your part of the country. Danielle has just popped the links into the chat. And so let's see, Native Plant Finder, that is a NWF program, which will rank the #1 keystone species that can support the most plants. It's like this whole filter. Homegrown National Park is an initiative from the National Park Service where you can actually designate and certify your home as a homegrown national park, which is pretty cool. And then again, that keystone plants is really great and breaks it down by ecoregion and gets really specific in the minutia of things. But that was a quick little overview of native plants. So I'm going to pass it back to Danielle.
Yes, so for the next part of the presentation, we're just going to have a few case studies so you can learn about what other congregations have done, get some cool photos, and hopefully be inspired to install some native plants on your grounds yourselves.
Oops.
So the Mid-Atlantic area that Natalie and I help to run actually has 2 Presbyterian churches in Sacred Grounds, Wilmington. So we thought we would uplift them. There's Westminster Presbyterian Church and Hanover Presbyterian Church, and they each have wrote about in their own designation form their own separate goals when it comes to installing their garden. So we also thought they were good case studies for showing that each congregation has different goals, and that can reflect in how they work in their garden. At Westminster Presbyterian Church, for example, their goal was to create a space to support a variety of church activities, including creating a space both for individual reflection and also for outdoor worship. So in their designation form, one of their church leaders said, turning this area into a native plants garden would create an inviting space for individual prayer, church gatherings, transforming this forgotten plot of land into an asset and spiritual resource. So their goal really was to take an underutilized space and transform it into a space that had many purposes, supporting native wildlife in addition to hosting events actually in the space. And then at Hanover,
Sorry, I don't know what's happening.
Well, I can just at Hanover, they worked with a few.
There we go. Okay, sorry.
They worked with Packeman Terrace and Jefferson Street Center Incorporated, and their main goal is a little more simple in terms of to make a positive impact upon their community, and in doing that, also have a space that is easy to maintain and create some peace for their community members. So you can see that they're, similar type of goals, but they still have their own unique space and their own unique vision for their garden, which can be represented in how the gardens came out.
And
so those are the Presbyterian churches that we have so far in Wilmington.
and I really love Hanover's, their mission. They work closely with Pacement Terrace, which is a social justice organization. So they're really grounded in creating like safe and peaceful, respectful places to for community members to gather. And so they're just really a really cool church and doing really cool work. And so there's just opportunities to collaborate and build community and all that good stuff. And down in Baltimore, this is a favorite congregation of mine, Still Meadow Community Fellowship. They are located in Southwest Baltimore. They are actively restoring a 10-acre parcel of neglected urban forest and turning it into a healthy and thriving forest and community space. So Still Meadow became a sacred grounds site in 2020. After the installation of 2 pollinator gardens, in addition to their stewardship of the Peace Park. And this project is also really grounded in social and environmental justice and reconnecting Black and Indigenous and people of color to nature through, the Peace Park, through the 10-acre parcel. But also this project, really the pastor was super motivated to transform this park, and they're doing a lot of other green infrastructure retrofits after an extreme flooding event in 2017 in Old Ellicott City, if folks had heard about that. So this was just about 5 miles down the hill in the city. They didn't receive hardly any support or media coverage compared to Ellicott City, which is a more affluent and white community that really has received so much publicity and support and resources. And so that's really where this call to action came from, was Pastor Michael Martin. It was after this flood event. And really through the Peace Park goals, they're really trying to form a beautiful and meditative space for the use of, for members of their congregation, as well as neighbors and visitors to use. Of course, they're also really wanting to improve their habitat and ecosystem services. And they have so many educational experiences there. It's really incredible what they're up to. This is from spring 2022. This is our incredibly pregnant boss on the left. She had a baby like later that month, which is insane. That's Lindsay Walker. She's our senior manager of education and conservation. But we knew that the forest was so incredible, but it wasn't the most accessible. So I met with the pastor and I said, well, what if we created a Be Still Meadow, because it's called Still Meadow Community Fellowship, and placed a picnic table and like a gathering space kind of surrounded by native plants. And so we removed sod. And so we did a full lawn conversion. So this was phase 1, but all of this grass back here has since been removed. And it's about a 1,500 square foot pollinator garden. That's just really awesome. And they also pay young people to help support their work as well. And this is just such an impressive list of partners that Still Meadow has been working with. They're actively in partnership with the USDA Forest Service, Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake, University of Delaware, Audubon, National Wildlife Federation, so the list goes on. And we just really wanted to share how impactful and strong of a partnership they have. And, that this could potentially inspire folks on this call to kind of think out of the box and some non-traditional partners on your project.
So the Islamic Community Center of Laurel, or ICCL, is part of the Sacred Grounds DMV. And although that is not the program that Natalie and I are mostly responsible for maintaining, we actually were able to attend this planting, and it was a really beautiful and really engaged day. So that's why we made it a case study. The fellow that works in our office, her name is Courtney, and she actually designed the garden that went into the ground, and people were so excited to be there. And it was really just amazing to see all these kids. You can see a bunch of kids in that photo. All these kids were running around trying to use tools that maybe were too big for them, and just really excited about the prospect of being in this garden and having this garden. I think one of the congregants even mentioned how cute it would be to take a photo of the kids in front of the garden and watch as the garden and the kids grew together. And it was absolutely organized chaos, but it was a really beautiful moment because people were so engaged and so excited to have this garden. At one point during the blessing of the garden, Natalie was so moved that she said that she was glad she was wearing her sunglasses so people couldn't see the expression on her face. So yeah, it was a really beautiful and engaged place, and a pretty big garden to install. So it was a really good day. And I was glad to be there.
It was a great day. And I'm grateful I had my sunglasses.
It
was moved. We're going to go back up to Wilmington, Delaware for our next example. This is the Dickerson Education Center, which is a part of our Sacred Grounds cohort in Wilmington. And it's a faith-based community center that provides after-school enrichment programs and other services for the community. So like Daniel said, most traditionally it is houses of worship and congregations, but any faith community can be a Sacred Grounds site. And I just want to give a huge shout out to Miss Karen Turner on the left, who is the lead on this project. And she's just a true community builder and a leader. And she works with interfaith community housing and has just been so instrumental to the success of our program in Wilmington. And at Dickerson Education Center, they sought out to transform a courtyard, which remained permanently locked. And they wanted to transform it into a welcoming and safe and peaceful place for celebration and community building. And through their project, they replaced a broken fence in the rear. They created a seating area with big old stumps, and they created 300 square foot of pollinator habitat. And one way that they've been involving their community is they've been decorating the garden throughout the seasons, which is amazing. So for Christmas, they put Christmas lights up all over the place and really cute lawn ornaments. It was decorated for Black History Month and Women's Month most recently. And so it's just really cool, and just shows an example of a non-traditional faith community, you know, engaging in this program.
And Natalie and I don't work in the Great Lakes area, but we wanted to make sure all of our programmatic areas were represented. So this is Majid Bilal, which was part of the first cohort of Sacred Grounds Cleveland. And this garden, this community committed to transform 643 square feet on their grounds into pollinator habitat. So that's really amazing. And according to our coworker, Tiffany Jones, who works in the Great Lakes area, the congregation is committing to increasing their garden space and also providing small stipends to congregants and youth in order to continue to maintain it, which is huge, because that tends to be one of the biggest problems, is maintaining interest in the garden and maintaining stewardship in the garden.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, this is a list of the plants that they used in their unique space. I think it was also featured on an earlier slide, and Tiffany said amazing site and a very committed faith leader. So that's always great to see when people continue to be engaged in their garden space.
So you may be asking yourself, how do I get involved? Sacred Ground sounds perfect. Well, it's pretty easy. So like Danielle said, if you are a lucky participant and worshiper in, you know, one of those Great Lake regions in the DC area or in Maryland, you could become a part of our Sacred Grounds cohort, where we provide technical assistance and mini grant funding to get your plants in the ground. However, this is a program that you can self-designate. And so we have all the resources online for you to, well, coming soon actually, but so the four main elements of Sacred Grounds is creating your wildlife habitat. So really putting those native plants in the ground, forming a committed green team to take care of them. You really want to engage your congregation and your surrounding community throughout the project, and making connections between faith practices and stewardship, whether that's from the pulpit or Vacation Bible School or Sunday school or, you know, fellowship outside, or, you know, however you see fit.
And one thing that Natalie has sort of already hinted at that is coming soon that will be helpful in increasing that engagement is the Sacred Grounds resource guide, which has been a couple years in the making, and we're very much hoping it will be active in the next couple months. Once it is active, the webpage will include free resources to help you throughout the entire process of Sacred Grounds. So resources on planning, installation, stewardship and maintenance, as well as some community engagement resources once your garden is in the ground. And if you're interested in having access to the resource guide, I think Natalie's email is going to be on like one of the next two slides. So make sure to let her know that you will be, and she can send it to you once the page is live. That's one of the resources that will be on there. It's a planning resource for trying to figure out what you want your garden to be like. And then once you're ready and you've done those four things that Natalie mentioned, you can designate your sacred ground via this link. I can pop it in the chat real quick. It's fairly extensive. I think it's a Qualtrics form. But once you fill that out, you're officially a member of Sacred Grounds, and you can either receive a free paper PDF copy of the sign, or you can pay a small fee to receive a metal yard sign. I want to say it's like $25, but we're not 100% sure about that. But either way, you'll be recorded as a Sacred Grounds site.
So thank you so much. And we hope you feel inspired to garden for wildlife where you worship. Again, that's my email at the bottom. So please reach out if you have any questions. And like Danielle said, that resource guide is coming, like hopefully within the next 2 months. So it'll be here soon, just in time for your fall garden installations. But thank you again so much. And I believe we have time for some questions. Then I will stop sharing.
All right. I think while you were talking, we had a few questions pop up in the chat, which may have been answered since, but maybe I'll go back and look at that first here. Somebody asked if they're going to get linked to the slides, and yes, we will have all that available. Let's see, we have someone has asked, could you talk a little bit about removing invasive plants?
Yes, definitely. Well, it can be tricky. It can be not so tricky. I think vines especially can be really hard. And if we don't like to recommend Roundup or other pesticides or herbicides, but if you do find a way, like you need to kill this plant off, that's the only way you can. There's better ways you can do it. So you can paint the stem, like cut it back and you can paint it. So there are ways that you can really tackle the really pesky invasive plants like English ivy or Japanese honeysuckle, which are just near impossible to get rid of. But it's really just a lot of hand weeding and just being very vigilant. There are lots of invasive species guides out there, depending on where you're tuning in from in the country. And I don't know if turf lawn, I don't know if it's considered invasive or not, but my favorite way to kill grass is to smother it with cardboard and mulch. So all you have to do is you weed whack your grass as low as it can possibly go, put a couple layers of cardboard, get that nice and moist, and then cover it with a thick blanket of mulch. And in 6 months, your grass will be gone underneath and ready to be planted, which is pretty cool and way easier than a manual sod removal.
All right, we have at least 10 more questions in the chat here that we can go through. How about the relationship between a wildlife habitat and sacred grounds? This person's church became wildlife habitat several years ago.
Yeah, so you can reapply as a sacred ground site, and since you already have your wildlife habitat, you've already ticked off that one box, and so we still ask you to engage your congregation, and if you already have, that's fantastic, and you can just report about that. But yeah, you can just go ahead and jump right to a designation if you're already a certified habitat by NWF. And if you're making the other elements of sacred grounds, like engaging your community and connecting faith practices, and you're good to go.
Okay, great. Are cultivars of native plants good for wildlife?
Yes, no, I think the verdict's still out. Some cultivars are worse for wildlife than others. I think like some hydrangea cultivars are pretty sterile, so they don't provide any pollen or nectar, any really reproductive services in terms of pollen production. So, I definitely would say that cultivars of hydrangeas are not the best. However, like native hydrangeas are absolutely wonderful performers, and the butterflies and the bees love them. But then there's other cultivars that really, they haven't had negative impacts on the habitat services. And there's actually, I'm gonna find the website. Mount Cuba is a horticultural site it's a botanical garden in Delaware that they have a trial garden. Yes. So, okay, there we go. Fawn just said it in there. Awesome. I will pop that in here. So yeah, they do incredible research on all the different types of cultivars. And they found that most of them are actually like not too bad.
Okay, thank you. We'll go ahead and call in Elizabeth. She has her hand raised if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for the presentation and the work that y'all are doing. This is exciting. I am curious. I am in a church in Atlanta that is very, very urban, and we have almost no grass at all. And so I was wondering if there are rooftop options or ways you've seen people be successful creative with limited lawn.
Yes. I love container gardening. It's super fun. There's lots of, different types of container gardening that you can do, but you can totally, from one little container. I've seen monarch caterpillars on a pot of milkweed on my porch, which is just so awesome. So even just like a container, or if you have like a downspout, let me see if I can find a cool downspout disconnection example. Yeah, there's lots of different creative ways for container gardening. Let's see if I can find this. Here's a cool one. So this is like you connect, I'll pop the link into the chat here. So just like a big tub, and they connect it right to their downspout. And so they're filtering and slowing that volume of runoff that would just flow into the street and into the sewers. And they're actually capturing and harnessing it in this container, which is really cool. And there's all different kinds of approaches that you can take with that method.
Yeah, that's super cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Somebody would like to know where they can find information on the radius of your existing cohorts. Is that on your website or?
So right now we have programs in that's a good question. I think I'll have to get back to you in terms of like the actual radiuses, but I know that like in the Mid-Atlantic, if you are in the DC or like the DMV area, that's one radius. Baltimore and Wilmington, Delaware are programs as well. And then in Detroit, Grand Rapids, Toledo, and Cleveland. So the Great Lakes, it's like really a hit out there. So if you're in one of those 4 areas, you could potentially be in a catchment area for sacred grounds.
I think we got through the ones in the chat. So if anybody would like to raise your hand to ask a question, we could call on you. If anybody had some additional questions. Bruce, did you have something? Oh, we have Kathy Brown.
Hello. I'm curious, is there a good suggestion for how to raise funds to buy these plants? We don't have much in our budget at our church in Leesburg.
Yeah. So I would say a good place to turn are watershed organizations. So you're in Leesburg, Virginia. So is that still in the Chesapeake, or is that outside of is that Southern Virginia? But I would say watershed orgs, because native plants really have such great green infrastructure and like stormwater management abilities. So you can install rain gardens, or if you have a lot of impervious surface like a massive parking lot or, you know, huge roofs, you can definitely tap into like rain check programs and get cisterns and native plants to reduce your stormwater bill if your municipality has one of those. I would also turn to different community foundation grants in Baltimore. I know that the city of Baltimore offers like little mini grants for beautification projects for residents to apply for. And then I also wonder if, I know when I worked at for the Lutherans, they had a, you know, money, a grant program that we could apply for. So maybe the Presbyterians also have something similar. But yeah, and I would also just turn to other environmental organizations and nonprofits in your area and see who they work with and who the common funders are.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Bruce, should we go to Tom next, or did you want to go first? Okay,
Tom's fine.
Tom, just unmute yourself. There we go.
This answers Kathy. This might be an answer to Kathy. I have 200. Laurel, would you turn off your? Sorry. I have a couple hundred plants in pots at the end of my driveway because we're having a church plant sale on Sunday, and we make $1,000 every time.
Wow.
We do it every Mother's Day. This time it's not going for a project like this. It goes to a different project, but most of those plants are out of my grounds, and it doesn't look like I took anything out.
Mm-hmm.
When things colonize, they're really easy to dig up and share, and
Mhm.
it's been good. We've been doing it for about 30 years.
Mhm. That's a good idea. We've done a little bit with tomatoes and vegetables and flower arrangements in some plants, but it might be a good starter project to get people in the congregation involved. So I like that. Thank you.
Think you're next, Bruce.
I really like your creative ideas. I live in a village, and the church is 200 years old, so we're surrounded by other buildings, but we do have some lawn. What do you think of clover as opposed to grass?
I think clover is a great substitute. It blooms early, so it's a really great source for the queen bees as they come out of hibernation. Same with dandelions. I'm a big fan of dandelions. But also clover is a nitrogen fixer too. So it'll fix nitrogen and add it to the soil. So you'll be increasing your soil health. But really, I'd say get rid of the lawn, get rid of the clover, and plant spring ephemerals and other native plants that kind of fill that role. And there's also lots of other great ground covers that have the same, you know, effect that like a low growing clover has. But I've seen like a really big push for clover over grass recently, and I'm not mad at it. I'm not mad.
Well, I see it as sort of a spectrum of level of activity and commitment. And
Yes.
clover, I think, would be an easier sale than, you know, stuff that is more visually very different.
Right.
I would vote for all the above, but pastors don't have say in everything in the church. So
Mhm. I know. Sometimes I've heard people be like, I don't know what the pastor was talking about. And you're like, oh, righty.
other questions, folks? Other comments?
Can you plant wildflowers in the shade we have?
Totally. Yeah. There are lots of shade tolerant plants. I don't know if I would consider them to be wildflowers, because when I think wildflowers, I think like meadows and full sun. but there are definitely a lot of plants that love and thrive in shade. And in fact, I'm going to throw in another link, because if you have large trees on your property, but they're just surrounded by grass, one easy way to really boost the aesthetics and the function. Remember that slide with like oaks being able to support 500 plus caterpillars? Well, when the caterpillars go into their cocoons, the last and final stage from their cocoon is they drop to the ground, and they oftentimes fall into, they need a soft landing. They need to be protected until they emerge as a beautiful butterfly or moth. And so there's this program called Soft Landings, and it is just so cool. And it's a really user-friendly way to, thank you, Danielle, to garden for wildlife under large trees. And so those are obviously going to be shade loving plants as well. And this is coming from Heather Holm, who is a professor at, where is she a professor? Oh, somewhere in the Midwest.
Yeah, and then in that link also, if you're looking specifically for shade loving plants, there's a whole like there's a pretty long table of different plants, and there's like X's in the states. It's not every state in the US that's listed here, but there's X's for different places where that plant is specifically native to. And you know that these plants are good under shade because they're specifically good for growing under trees to provide those soft landings.
Mm-hmm.
We have somebody else named Bruce with a question.
Yes, Bruce Chapman, Charlotte, North Carolina. Good evening, everybody.
Hello.
Thank you for a very informative presentations. I may have missed it. I got in a little late, but any word about wetland habitat? Our church has a stormwater retention pond that currently is being mowed, and we're contemplating a way to convert it to a wetland habitat. Didn't know if there's any among churches.
I mean, I love that idea so much. There are definitely lots of native plants that can be, so it would be called a bioretention retrofit. So you would definitely, if you just Google that, you'll find lots of good information there. I'm not really the most versed in like wetland or really moist and wet loving plants. But there's definitely lots of literature out there, and I think that would be a great project.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Bruce, would you, it's 8:30. Would you like to close this out in any way? We'll stop the recording, and then if people have more questions.
Yes, I do want to point out in the chat, Jessica Maldwin, who's our national staff person for Earth Care Congregations, sent a news story and a link to a church in Pennsylvania that has a program called Nature to Nurture, and they have a downloadable guide that I included in the chat. So not only do you have all these wonderful things from the Wildlife Federation, but also your Presbyterian church is giving you a freebie handbook. So thank you all for being here. We will stick around. We do hope you will share this recording with many other churches to get more and more people doing this. Bless you all in your care for God's creation. And stay if you'd like to ask more questions. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.